Good evening, all, and welcome to the Women of Color Collective Annual Alumni Reception. My name is Jamie Fofana, and alongside Alexandra Gray, I serve as Executive Co-Chair of the Women of Color Collective at NYU School of Law, also known as WOC. WOC is first and foremost a family. Women of color are vastly underrepresented in the legal profession, and law school can often feel isolating in unexpected ways. By providing a space for women of color to connect, mentor, and inspire each other, WOC serves a crucial function both to the women of color at the law school and the NYU community at large. WOC is excited to be celebrating its 14th year on campus. In the face of the past year's unprecedented challenges, our community has managed to maintain numerous traditions and build community. We host our WOC coffee shops, panels on litigation, corporate law, public interest, and we are in the process of forming the first ever virtual Mr. WOC fundraiser. This year's theme is Building Bridges and Advancing Justice. Aptly, the past year shone a spotlight on deep-seated inequities embedded into our culture and our broader systems of accountability. The summer in particular forced a reckoning within the legal community over the ways in which we contribute to mass incarceration and the ways that we may use our skills in active service of justice. Each year, we honor a woman of color alumna who embodies our theme through their work. And this year, we are thrilled to honor Shante Parker, Managing Director of Neighborhood Defender Services of Detroit. But before we hear from Shante, I'm thrilled to invite another strong supporter of the Women of Color Collective to speak. Dean Trevor Morrison, the Dean of the Law School, has been in WOC's corner since our inception. I have personally had the pleasure of getting to know Dean Morrison as a Birnbaum Women's Leadership Network Fellow and through his presence at all of WOC's most important events of the year. The entire WOC community is thankful to Dean Morrison for continually championing our careers and development. With grace and honor, I am pleased to introduce Dean Trevor Morrison.
Good evening, I'm Trevor Morrison, the Dean of the Law School, and I'm very glad to welcome you to this year's Women of Color Collective Alumni Reception. We are, of course, sorry that we can't be gathering in person as we typically do at this time of year, but I'm very grateful to all of you for joining us for this virtual reception. WOC is one of the most important student organizations on campus at the law school and a real leader among student organizations, an important contributor to the vibrant intellectual life of this place. And we're thrilled that it can continue its work and engagement with students and graduates in this forum today. And we are really thrilled to be able to honor distinguished alumni of the law school each year through this program as well. And this year, we're thrilled to honor Shante Parker, of the class of 2006, now the Managing Director of Neighborhood Defender Service in Detroit. Shante will be formally introduced in a moment and awarded the Woman of Distinction Award. I just want to say how proud the law school is of her, and how proud we are of WOC, again, as a vital organization and real leader in our law school community. So thank you again to all of you for joining us. Thank you once again to our honoree. And now Jamie Fofana will present the Woman of Distinction Award.
Thank you, Dean Morrison. It is now my pleasure to introduce the 2021 Woman of Distinction Award recipient, Shante Parker, NYU Law, class of 2006. Shante has demonstrated excellence in both the legal profession and in supporting diverse and upcoming lawyers who may not always see themselves represented in positions of power or leadership. Shante defines herself as a helper, and it is through this lens, she says, that she relates to the world. That disposition led Shante to both Spelman College and NYU Law, where she uncovered a strong interest in becoming a public defender. Years after graduating, Shante has already held a wide range of positions as a public defender, working for the Orleans Public Defenders, Neighborhood Defender Service of Harlem, Legal Aid Society, and the Innocence Project. Now, in her role as Managing Director of the Neighborhood Defender Service of Detroit, Shante provides her community with the highest quality legal representation through community-based holistic public defense. Shante?
Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of a life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up. Here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. The beautiful Black poet, Lucille Clifton, wrote these words. And every time I read them, I feel as if she wrote them just for me and for you, Women of Color Collective. I thank you so much for this honor. I'm really, really honored to receive the award. And so I begin my remarks by sharing Ms. Clifton's words as a save, as a mantra, and as a mandate. First is a save. Now, what's a save? Save is an ointment used to promote healing or protection. And as a law student, I certainly needed these words. I arrived at NYU Law fresh off the midnight train from Savannah, Georgia. And I felt at once out of place and extremely determined. I was thrust into a class of over 400 other students, many of whom seemed older and more worldly than myself. My peers seemed to know exactly what they wanted out of this experience, as I was still exploring this new environment and trying to find my way. While I had carefully chosen NYU Law because of its promise to expand my potential, I didn't have really any idea what a public defender was. You see, I came from a community where lawyers were respected and revered for what they did for everybody in all kinds of spaces, at school board meetings, civil rights rallies, and in criminal courtrooms. But I was able to find my place in clinic spaces cultivated by Professor Kim Taylor Thompson, Professor Tony Thompson, Professor Randy Hertz, and others at NYU Law. And I also found healing in spaces like BALSA, the Black Allied Law Students Association, a place where I could express my frustration at the cases that we were seeing where Black people were being crushed by the criminal legal system. I can remember Marcus Dixon's case, a Black teenager, honor student who was headed to Vanderbilt College, but was locked up before he could graduate for having consensual sex with a classmate. And surely had the Women of Color Collective existed at that time, I would have found healing in a space specifically for women of color as well. Ms. Clifton's words have also been a mantra for me. And a mantra is a word or statement that's repeated to aid concentration in meditation. And so I have used Ms. Clifton's words as a mantra in New Orleans. Marcus's case, as well as others that I learned about during law school and in the NYU Law clinics, made clear that I wanted to be a public defender. And in the spring of 2008, I left New York and a fairly high-paying job at a law firm to become a public defender in New Orleans. And this was just years after a devastating hurricane ravaged this city and so many of its Black communities. I became a public defender because of my love for Black people, because I wanted to be a helper, and because I had a burning desire to be a litigator. What I knew for sure is that my people were disproportionately suffering in this racist system, and that trials fascinated me. But there was just one thing. I was terrified of actually doing the job, right? Meeting my clients where they were, standing up to prosecutors and judges, and speaking in front of strangers. Yet I pushed through. And I used Ms. Clifton's words as a mantra. And with the help of a community of Black women and men who were working alongside me, I was able to do the work. For example, one day, my new boss took me on a tour of the office, and then we went over to arraignments at the court. But instead of going to the court like I thought, we breezed past and went to the parish jail. Inside, I saw what looked like an elementary school cafeteria. White cinder block walls that appeared dingy in the glow of the buzzing fluorescent lights, and neatly arranged rows of multicolored plastic chairs facing a large flat screen TV. Soon enough, out came the men and the women, all of them Black people each and every one stripped of their own clothing, cloaked in orange jumpsuits, and shackled at their wrists and ankles. In that moment, I became possessed of a distinct bewilderment and sadness and rage all at once. It was clear to me what I had to do. And as the brilliant Audre Lorde once said, when I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. I was going to be a public defender whether I liked it or not. And lastly, Ms. Clifton's words have most recently been a mandate for me since I have arrived in Detroit a little over 2 years ago. Now, what's a mandate? A mandate is authority granted by a constituency. And when I recite Ms. Clifton's poem in the mirror, sometimes before a big presentation, sometimes when I'm sitting in a waiting room before an important interview, or when I'm about to go speak with someone about funding for our organization, I imagine Ms. Clifton standing over me, her hair trimmed in a silver afro, a halo around her face, and she's dressed as a Dahomey warrior woman. And she's come to bestow on me with her sacred words and power, the ability to do what I need to do. Oftentimes in my role as the managing director here at NDS, part of what I have to do is to seek out other warrior women, particularly women of color. In Detroit, which is one of the Blackest cities in America, the opportunity to build a public defender office has been a dream come true. Very few people in my field, and really in any field, get the opportunity to start a public interest law firm from scratch. What a responsibility it has been to hire close to 70 people. What an honor and a privilege it has been to support diverse and up-and-coming lawyers and advocates who may not always see themselves reflected in positions of power. I get to be that reflection for them as a Black woman and as a relatively young Black woman. And I take this job very seriously. What systems and tools can I use to grow a diverse pool of applicants to be able to select the best possible staff to serve our clients? And I'm proud to say that as of today, our staff is 62 people, 59% of that staff is women, and 46% of that staff are Black folks. And this means something to our clients, to the community that we serve. I've made it a priority to have not only our staff, our attorneys, but also our interns reflect the people we serve. And it hasn't always been easy. This work, the injustices that we see within the criminal legal system, particularly in this last year, and the way in which the racism and white supremacy that's baked into the system has been on full display, has for many years, over a decade, made my knees shake and my voice quiver. This work has torn my chest open, snatched at my heart and lungs, and left me breathless. This work has plunged me to the depths of despair, chased me away in shame, and then lovingly enticed me back again. But this work has also gifted me some of my most cherished friendships, centering me in a tribe of people who see me and support me in all of my Blackness. And this work has given me confidence and power, grace, and humility. So in closing, as women of color, know that power and leadership is our birthright. We're good at it, and we're made for it. Women, and particularly women of color, and as a Black woman, this is particularly for Black women as well, we've often been studying the problems that we are going to encounter in our professional lives for many years before we pass the bar and become advocates. And for me, Lucille Clifton's words have been my save, my mantra, and my mandate. Find yours. Thank you so much for the honor.
Thank you so much, Shantae, for that absolutely beautiful and very honest speech. Sometimes you were talking and just describing your experiences, and I was really struck by all of the thought you put into describing them and the really moving language that you used. And it was just inspiring to hear about your career trajectory and how you've thought about things throughout your life. Just to briefly introduce myself to this virtual room, my name is Alexandra Gray, and I'm an executive co-chair of WALK along with Jamie. And in normal times, we would usually end this event with some mingling over refreshments, but this year we're excited to launch into a Q&A session to make things a little more interactive. And we have a couple of questions lined up for Shantae that people did submit in advance when they RSVP'd. So we'll start out with some of those, but after a couple minutes, I will open it up to the floor for anyone at home who wants to ask her any questions. I'm sure she has a wealth of knowledge that she would be happy to share. And so just to kick things off, since I think a lot of students are in attendance at the event, I know you mentioned that when you came to law school, you weren't quite sure about what you would want to do. So the question is how you navigated exploring your interests, how you chose to take different kinds of classes or clinics or form relationships in groups and with professors. And I think any advice to that end would be helpful for folks going through that process now.
Yeah, I think that I tried to focus in on spaces where I felt connection and felt like home. And so I go into Spelman, as Jamie mentioned. And so I was immediately looking for the Black spaces when I got to NYU. And so what the great thing about NYU is that there are so many great spaces for students to connect with folks who look like them and may have similar experiences. And so that was an entry point for me. And then I had folks in that community who could tell me about, okay, first year was tough. Doctrinal classes are tough. What do I do? Because I don't want to do any more of those kinds of classes. And folks would tell me about clinics, and the clinic fair was a great way to meet some of those professors and learn about what they offered. And once I got into that clinic my second year, I was hooked, and I was like, anything I can do to really get that practical experience, to get out into the community in an organization that was doing the work that I was kind of thinking about was super helpful to me. And so I'm really grateful at the number of offerings with regard to clinics and the professors who made themselves accessible to me to talk through my desires for my career after law school.
That's great advice. And I know we do have a bunch of defense-related clinics at the law school, and I think the process is actually opening now for clinic applications. And I know it can be a little bit daunting for folks who haven't actually had concrete experiences in areas, but know that they want to explore it. So do you have any advice for maybe the types of skills that one could gain that they could talk about in clinic applications, or experiences that you think that it would be good for students to have who might be interested in those types of careers, or just figuring out if it's a career for them?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because like I mentioned in my remarks, I really didn't know what a public defender was. So I was coming in like, please pick me for this public defender clinic. I haven't, interned with a criminal lawyer or done organizing work. But I think showing your curiosity about a particular area of the law, your willingness to explore and learn and be a hard worker, I think are those just great skills that you need in any profession. And so being able to demonstrate those in your application, even if you haven't had that experience, is super valuable in your application. when I interview interns now, I let folks know that, hey, it's okay if you haven't ever worked at a public defender office. If you have been having to work to support yourself and your family through undergrad and law school, then you may not have had the privilege to take an internship that's not paid. So that's not a disqualifier for me, and it probably won't be for the clinic professors. What I think I look for and what I hope that they look for is that, like I said, that curiosity, resilience, a hard worker. And if you can demonstrate those things on your application and also project your intense desire to learn more, which I certainly, I guess I did because I got in, but I like to hear folks talk about really wanting to learn more and the excitement and passion they have for the field.
That's great advice and hopefully helpful to some of our 1Ls and 2Ls thinking about exploring that work through clinics. Mm-hmm. And another question that some folks had was, if you think back to what your 1L experience was like, is there any advice you would like to give to that person or anything you think you might do differently?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I think I would just say, relax, girl. It's okay. Get to know more people. Like, I think I did connect and make community, but just be open to also connecting with a whole lot more people who may have different experiences than I had. And to just relax that it's you are doing your very best and you don't need to stress out. You don't need to worry so much about where you fall in comparison to your peers, and really just be present for each moment, which can be hard because you're so worried about, this exams and will I have the right grades? Will I do the right things to get on a journal? Or, will I have what I need to make the writing competition? I think just being more present in the moment in class and with each day and with my classmates is what I would tell myself, and to relax. But I know that's hard to say, but it's really true. Just relax. You got it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously I'm still in law school now, but I would probably tell my 1L self a similar thing, which is to just chill out a bit. So it's great to hear that you still feel that way, even after having had such a successful career.
Yeah.
Oh, we had a question pop up in the chat. I'll read it aloud. So you spoke of the despair and heartache inherently involved in defense work. How have you been able to maintain yourself and find joy and peace doing this work? How, if at all, have you dealt with becoming jaded with the legal system, burned out, or experiencing secondhand trauma? This is a great question.
Yeah, this is a really great question. I had to work at it. It did not come easy to me. There were moments on my journey where I actually did step away from the work and take some time off, because it really is that hard, and you're witnessing trauma to people exacted by a system that's supposed to protect them. And you often feel like you're doing your absolute very best, and that's just not good enough. And so what I learned over time is that I had to really pour into myself and fill up my cup so that I could come to the work full and give my overflow. And so practically what that looked like was developing a toolkit of things that I could go to when I felt myself getting to the point of burnout. So for example, really developing a relationship with nature wherever I was. And that looked like just taking walks, and that taking time away each day to take a walk in whatever neighborhood I was living in. That looked like taking a trip, every quarter to go home to see my family or visit friends in another place, or to visit a new place so that I could come back refreshed. That looked like doing a lot more meditation and developing a meditation practice that I had no idea about until it was forced to really to figure that out. So whatever those tools look like for you, if you don't have any, that's okay. Kind of take some time to think about what makes you happy, what makes you smile, and have those go-tos ready for when you get close to that point. And also selecting workplaces where there's a real emphasis and value placed on taking care of yourself. And you see that reflected in the leadership, that they take care of themselves and that they give you space and really encourage you to do it. It's something I talk to my staff a lot about, especially during the pandemic. I say, take your time. These cases aren't going anywhere. Take your time. Because I know personally what it feels and looks like to burn out on the work, and it's not good for you, and it's certainly not good for your clients.
Yeah, that's a really important piece of advice. And as I'm sure you remember, as a law student, I think it's important at all times, but it's easy to forget as a law student, and it's only the beginning. So
Yes.
Being able to sustain yourself for years is important.
Very, very.
Yeah. And I will read aloud another question we just received, which is, what do you consider to be the significant legal issues in your area of practice that will be litigated in courts over the next 5 years? And just a congratulations on your honor.
Thank you, Jenny. This is a really good question. I think that appearances, hearings, and in places where they're doing trials over Zoom, this is going to be a really big issue because so much, by necessity, we've had to switch a lot of our practice, our day-to-day appearances to Zoom and other video virtual appearances. And on the one hand, it's great because it can facilitate you getting in front of a judge to make arguments for the release of clients who otherwise might continue to sit and languish in prison or jail. But on the other hand, I think courts may be eager to keep some of these things going. We are seeing hearings being forced or, folks being kind of pushed to have hearings and maybe in some cases trials via Zoom. And so I think that's an issue where we're going to see, do those proceedings stand up the test of time over appeals? And also if courts are looking to keep these appearances in a virtual environment, even after courts begin to open back up, what leverage and arguments can defenders, other practitioners make to stop that from happening? Because this is not the best way for our clients to obtain justice. You aren't being seen as a person. You're not in front of the decision maker when you're on Zoom. So I think that's going to be a significant issue. And then I also think speedy trial issues are going to begin to become a real issue because, again, we've seen one trial in Detroit since March. Our office has tried one case since March of last year. And so as clients, again, are sitting incarcerated and also just out on bail or bond, how long will these cases languish? And at what point will we start to be able to make some real viable speedy trial arguments? So those are the two that I can think about right now as being some real issues for us. And the third, I would add a third, is electronic surveillance, right? And monitoring, because we have been able to get quite a few people out of incarceration pre-trial, but they often are placed on electronic monitoring, ankle bracelets, those kinds of things. And so that's not necessarily, that's still a form of incarceration. And the way that they're monitored there, I think, is going to be a huge issue for us as well.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing your insights. And also related to your work, we have a question from Linda Gadsby, who's actually also a former walk honoree. And she was wondering if you found any significant differences in your work between Louisiana and Detroit.
Thank you, Linda. Congrats and good to see you. Thanks for the question. This is a really good one too, because I actually see a lot of similarities, but there are some differences. You know, when I went to New Orleans, they were just couple years out of and still struggling with the devastation of Hurricane Katrina. So there were ways in which their system, they've been doing things a certain way within the criminal legal system there. And I was part of an office that was new and was getting started and was trying to change the culture, change the way things were done. And so we did a lot of case by case trying to push the system, but also a lot of systemic litigation in the years that I was there. And so Detroit is, I would say, in a similar position, but a little bit behind or just differently situated than where New Orleans was, because I think that they are wanting to do some change to their criminal legal system, and particularly to indigent defense. That's one of the reasons why the Neighborhood Defender Service was contracted to come in and start a new public defender office. There was a recognition that the indigent defense system was not working for defendants or clients, and that the standard of practice was not up to par to the constitutional requirements. And so there was a lot of movement and inertia to change that, but then COVID happens. And so now we are dealing with a public health disaster and crisis that has really slowed down some of that inertia. So I think some of the main differences there is that there in Detroit and in Michigan, there at least was a recognition at the state level that something needed to change. And so the state has infused quite a bit of funding to the local level to improve indigent defense. In New Orleans at the time, and still to this day, there are still struggles with the funding of that office, both then and now, because while there's some recognition that indigent defense needs assistance, the funding piece of it is not quite where it should be. And you don't have the kind of support for it, I think, that we see in Detroit. But I have used a lot, actually, my experience in New Orleans with regard to culture change and trying to infuse new energy into the system here in Wayne County and Detroit. So there's a lot more similarities than you would think. And I think as we progress, I'm now looking to see what the other system players are going to be doing to help address the problems that we see in the criminal legal system, right? New Orleans just got a new prosecutor who is very progressive, former defense attorney. And so I expect that they will see some changes there in their system. In Detroit, we are still kind of thinking about how to encourage the local prosecutor to be more progressive in some of their policy decisions to help with the mass incarceration that we see.
And that actually ties in perfectly with another question that we were just asked, and it is what you think the most effective or important longer term policy work that the NDS Detroit does?
That's a good question. I think one of the most effective things that we can do is lead by example and create a high standard of representation that will then trickle out to the other folks, the private bar that represents folks who are indigent, as well as to other system players, right? Because that's what I saw happen in New Orleans. There was a huge change in the public defender office that did ripple out into the private bar. So one of the things that we're doing here in Wayne County is that we are tasked with training a lot of the folks who take assigned counsel cases, the private bar here in Wayne County. And so I think that's going to have a real impact because we are helping develop training for the private attorneys. I think having advocates in court who are filing more aggressive motions, who are coming to preliminary examinations well prepared to cross all the witnesses, who are pushing cases to trial that would normally maybe be resolved before that point. That shows an example to the rest of the bar that, hey, there's other ways and innovative ways that we can represent our clients rather than maybe the way we've been seeing it done. It also perks up the judges, right, to be aware of innovative ways of representing clients. And it really holds the prosecutor to their standard, right? It says, listen, before you bring a case, we're going to really test you at the preliminary exam stage to see if you've got this probable cause for this case. And if there's not, we're going to argue and maybe the judge will dismiss it. And if you don't have a case, your witnesses aren't available, we're not going to just plead out. We are going to say, let's have a trial here and make you prove beyond a reasonable doubt our client's guilt. And if you can't do that, then you shouldn't get a guilty verdict. So I think that's the way that we ripple things out. The biggest thing that we can do is to create a standard of practice that is higher than what we've been seeing. And that's going to ripple out to the other parts of the system.
Got it. That's really interesting to hear. And we obviously have a lot of folks in attendance and who submitted questions who are interested in criminal defense. And so a question that some people had, but kind of a different angle about your work, is what your experience has been as a woman of color, in the public defense world or even the legal world generally, and whether the way you've navigated these spaces with respect to your race and gender have changed over time.
Yeah, I think that I certainly felt that I had to be my absolute best and be fully prepared, because I understood that, rightly or wrongly, some of my clients would experience me in a way that they might second guess my abilities because I was a Black woman who started off relatively young and looked sort of young. And so I really sort of made sure that I was prepared, knowledgeable every time I sat down with the client. And so that's certainly something that I'm not sure if my colleagues who were not Black women did. They may have, because that's just who they are, but I think I really overdid it. And when we talk about burnout, doing way too much work, burning the candle at both ends, working 10 hours a day when I started out was a way that I think I overcompensated for that. But there were also ways in which my clients connected with me more quickly, I think, because I was a Black woman, and they were excited to see me as their lawyer, and they felt good about me representing them. So there was a little bit of both of that in my experience. And so I, again, had to, over time, sort of kind of modulate and understand what I needed to do to perform my job as I got more proficient in the practice, and learn how to be my authentic self and that the best way to connect with my clients, with the court, with jurors in trial was to be my authentic self. And sometimes that meant naming what was going on with me, naming that, I remember in one trial I did, I named how nervous I was about the lack of evidence the prosecutor had, and they were trying to convict this young Black man I was representing, just naming that and being authentic about what I brought to the table as a Black woman. And that has served me well as I've continued in my career and rose up in the ranks of leaderships. I found that being vulnerable, being transparent and authentic about who I am and what drives me in this work has served me and is the superpower.
That's really great to hear. And just to follow up, so you feel like when you express these very real concerns that you have in court, what's the reaction of judges to those kinds of feelings?
It's mixed. I think it really depends on the audience as to whether it's going to be an effective strategy. But that's, I think, part of being a public defender is learning, particularly if you're appearing in front of a certain judge over and over again, you sort of learn what works and what doesn't. But I found that it changes up the dynamic because some of these jurists are used to just sitting all day hearing hundreds of cases. And so to bring a little bit of that vulnerability, to bring a little bit of emotion, to make sure they understand and see my client as a human being and telling their story in a way that's different from the last 10 cases that they've heard in arraignments can be helpful just to shock them out of, the monotony of the process. So, and sometimes it doesn't work, but we keep trying, we're persistent.
That's good to hear. And a totally different kind of question, but some folks were wondering if you have any personal or professional mentors that inspire you in your life or work.
That's a good one. I would say that I have right now a group of colleagues who are Black women who are leaders of public defender offices. It's a group of 3 of us now, and I consider them mentors. We kind of every a month or so, we meet on Zoom and just connect and talk about what's happening in our offices. And while we're all sort of peers, they are definitely mentors to me because we each know what to do sometimes and have the knowledge to solve a problem, but sometimes we just need that validation of the sister chief in another city to bounce the next step off of and hear yeah, girl, you got this. That's exactly the right thing to do. And so I really do value those other Black women chiefs of defender offices right now as mentors.
That's great. And also I'd like to invite people to pop questions in the chat at any point if they would like to ask something that we haven't discussed. But returning to the discussion about your relationship with other women of color, people were wondering if you have any advice for how either women in the legal field, women of color in the legal field, or just generally can support each other, and especially given your leadership role, how you use that maybe to uplift other women of color, or even just more generally the values that you try to imbue into your own leadership. I think I just asked you a lot of different questions at once, so sorry for that.
Yeah, I think one of the most valuable experiences I had around this topic was going to Spelman, because I was able to see the diversity within Black womanhood being at Spelman. It's a class of, I would say 200 or 300 women from all over the country and the world. And so I just was in awe of all these girls who were smart, beautiful, and they came from like Brooklyn and DC and Seattle and the islands. And it just was like, we all can exist. We all came from our communities and were, valedictorians and heads of classes, cheerleaders, honor students, actresses. And we then came to this beautiful space that had room for all of us to thrive and grow. We were all Spelman sisters, right? And so that for me was confirmation of what I think I had grew up seeing. My mom is one of 4 girls. I'm one of 3 girls. And so I grew up around Black women in my family and in my community spaces where we all could be our authentic selves, and then to have that reaffirmed in an educational setting at Spelman really solidified for me that you don't have to compete and you don't have to diminish another woman to make yourself feel better and look better. And so I've really been able to take that into most of my future educational spaces and workspaces, that it's a sort of connection when I see another woman of color, a Black woman in a space like that. And I want to get to know her and understand what brought her to the point where we intersected, and generally how we can rock and support each other. And at the very least, we might not always click, but I'm not going to diminish you or speak ill of you to others, right? It's just neutral. So I think that Spelman experience has shaped the way that I've interacted with other Black women in my workspaces. That, we're partners, we're going to help each other out. I saw that at NYU. I saw that in New Orleans when I started. I started with a couple of other Black women who are still great friends of mine to this day, who, as we've gone on, one's a judge, one's a professor, I champion them and all that they're doing. And then now as a leader, I'm thinking about the Black women and women of color on my team and spending time with them to figure out what do they need to achieve their professional goals, and is there anything that I can do to assist them? Because what I find is that often Black women, particularly in spaces where there may be few of us, is that we, not always, but tend to be nose to the grind, working hard, and filling in a lot of gaps, providing a lot of support in ways that aren't often seen and recognized. And so one of the things that I try to do is to spotlight that and make it seen and known, and say, hey, this person on our team, they may not ever complain. You may not all think of them first when you're thinking about a particular promotion or a particular opportunity, but actually they would be really great for it. And to name why for others. And once they actually, that bias is removed, they see that. And so sometimes it takes calling that out for other Black women, other women of color in the spaces where I work, to make sure that their work becomes visible.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it's great that you had your experience at Spelman's relatively early in your life, and that I feel like a lot of us, experience school or professional experiences where you might be one of the very few women of color, and suddenly when you experience being in a group of women of color for the first time, you're like, wow, this is how great it can feel. And then hopefully we can carry the things that we learn from those spaces into the other spaces that we occupy as well. And it's also, I think another question is, it's easy to look at someone's resume and see an amazing line of accomplishments as if they've always been on a trajectory towards success. And you clearly have an impressive resume, and we're here honoring you today. But has it always felt that way for you? Or it would be interesting to hear if you'd mind sharing any setbacks or self-doubts you've experienced along the way.
Yeah, that's I laugh because I have had a lot of setbacks. When I didn't immediately go from NYU to a public defender office. I went to a firm, a couple of them. And in hindsight, I'm like, why did you even do that? But those were the choices that I made right out of law school to go work at firms. They were experiences that were valuable. I don't regret any experiences that I've had, but it was not a straight line to public defense at all. So that I think I found myself in these situations. I was like, this isn't quite what I thought it was going to be, and this is not the right fit. And so what I do like about myself a whole lot is that when I feel that, I am able to make an adjustment. And I don't just let the fact that I may have made a decision and other people might say, oh, you got to wait 5 years. You shouldn't make this move. It's too soon. I don't let that deter me. If it doesn't feel right and I need to course correct, I will course correct. And so those I think were a couple setbacks early on. And I've really used that sort of impulse throughout my career once I got to public defender work was to really kind of be in tune with my internal sort of tuning fork to kind of understand when that time came. Because I say this all the time, I think work should be getting paid to learn. And so I approach my positions that way, that I really want to learn and jump in and get a lot of experience. And when I feel like I'm not being stretched anymore, or there's a different experience that I need to have to get me where I want to be, then I'm going to, again, change course, right? So I knew, my friends tell me this, I kind of forgot, but I knew when I was in New Orleans that I wanted to eventually head an office. And so, because my friends say all the time, oh, you always said you wanted to head an office. And I'm like, really, did I? But what I did was I think I broke it down into smaller parts. So what do I need to be a head of office? First, I got to be proficient at being a line public defender, trying cases, and get those skills up. Then I knew I needed to get into a supervisory role. And so I did that. And I also was like, well, what else do I need on my plate here? And I wanted to learn how to do policy work, communications, administration, and step away from direct services. So I took some time and did some work at the Innocence Project. I was not in direct services and then came back. And so when I was in it, it felt like a very windy road, but it did ultimately get me to where I wanted to go because I broke down the steps that it would take to get me there. And along the way, I took off 3 months because I burned out and I had a client who passed away and it was devastating and I couldn't do the work anymore. So I literally went home for a little bit. But like I said, I think those are 2 setbacks. But I still ended up where I needed to be and where I wanted to be because I, again, kind of clued into my eternal tuning fork and knew when to make the adjustments that were going to be beneficial to me personally and professionally.
I really like that idea of the tuning fork. And I guess maybe the most that people can do is just take things step by step and think about, what you said, what they're interested in learning and how people can grow. Mm-hmm. And maybe just as a quick last question, I was wondering if you had any parting advice for especially law students of color about, just approaching either if they're interested in public interest work or just becoming a lawyer generally.
I would say be bold and courageous in whatever it is that you are looking to do. I don't think I had an exact role model for where I ended up and how I ended up, right? I just knew I wanted to learn and push myself along the way. And I was always willing to take bold and courageous steps to get there and to figure out new and courageous ways to fight in the criminal legal system. I knew I didn't want to do it the same old way that had been done before. But there's no road for where we haven't been. So my advice to students, whether they're thinking about a career in public interest work or thinking about a career in the private sector or thinking about doing something completely different, entrepreneur, social engineer with their legal career, is to be bold and courageous. Begin to dream about what the world looks like for you if you can solve some of the issues, the biggest problems that keep you up at night, that make you angry, and that you're passionate about. And when you dream of that world, figure out, how do you get there? How do you navigate the current world to get to where you want to be?
That is a great piece of advice, and a great piece of advice to end on. I recognize we're coming close to the end of time, but thank you so much for taking the time to answer all of those questions. And just to cap everything off, I'd like to say a big thank you on behalf of all of NYU Walk to you, Shante, for joining us this evening. It's a real honor to have such a distinguished NYU alumna speak with us, particularly one who's dedicated her career to criminal justice and uplifting communities of color and women. We'd also like to thank the offices of Alumni Affairs and Student Affairs, especially Kelly Spencer, for organizing this event and adapting it to be in this virtual format. Thank you also to the Birnbaum Women's Leadership Network for sponsoring this event and supporting WALK throughout the year. Of course, we'd also like to thank the WALK board, who are all in attendance tonight, and they've just worked incredibly hard during such a challenging year to maintain a supportive space for women of color at the law school. We are also grateful to our platinum sponsor firms, Cooley, Kirkland & Ellis, Paul Hastings, Paul Weiss, Ropes & Gray, and Sidley Austin. Sponsor firms play a tremendous role in allowing WALK to put on our robust programming for our members year after year. And finally, thank you so much to all of our attendees for tuning in tonight. I know that being on Zoom all the time, every day, is exhausting, so we are incredibly appreciative of this gathering of current WALK students, women of color alumni, and other members of the law school and legal community. We hope that we'll be able to gather for this event in person next year, maybe over some nice hors d'oeuvres and a glass of wine. But until then, thank you, everyone, and we hope everyone has a great rest of the night.
Thank you.